Hi, this is Father Bill here in Austin, Texas. I am an Episcopal priest in recovery, long-term recovery, I think. It's getting up there. I'll have 48 years if I make it to December of this year. And I want to welcome you to the podcast. If you have not been following us, I really encourage you to go to our website. It's called Two-Way Prayer, and discover the lost practice of prayer and meditation that they used to do in early AA. And you can follow me on Facebook if you do that, Father Bill W. If you have not attended one of our two-way prayer workshops, we have two of them coming up. This is going to be one in October and another in November. And we're doing these on Saturday. So we had been doing a series on Wednesdays, and that was difficult for some people. So they're going to be on Saturdays, Saturday morning, Central Time, 10 o'clock. Shoot me an email, and I'll send you a flyer and sign you up for the newsletter, and you can get that information. I also want to do a real shout out to the good folks down in Australia. I was invited to do a two-way prayer workshop with them. They were celebrating their annual AA convention. And of course, with the COVID thing, they were not able to get together in person. So they did it via Zoom and invited me to come and speak. We did the two-way prayer workshop. Also did a talk on 12-step spirituality. Wonderful, wonderful people down there. If you're listening, and I know some of you are. So thank you so much for the chance to be with y'all. They represent about 8% or more of our listening audience. So for these podcasts, so there's something really good going down down under there, and we're really happy that they're part of this effort to go back and look at some of the pioneer efforts and program and get a maybe deeper understanding of what recovery can be about. So we're doing this series on psychic change. This is the second in the series, and in the first episode, we tried to define the word as best we could, and of course, it goes by many names. You might call it a spiritual awakening, a conversion experience, a psychic change. The names have changed over time, but the end result is always the same. And what is that? It's a new and a very different state of consciousness. And that's really, what the 12th step says is that, having had a spiritual experience, a spiritual awakening, a psychic change, a conversion experience, having had that as the result of these steps. So that's the primary purpose of the 12-step process, is to give us a shift in consciousness. In our first episode, we quoted a bit from William James, the father of American psychology, and he talks there about a sudden shift happening at an unconscious level that transforms the individual, shakes up the ego, and brings it into a new state of consciousness. He makes the point that it's a humble state of consciousness, that one of the problems in life is that we inflate, we get puffed up, and transformation actually happens when the balloon begins to shrink. That's when the change is really experienced. And what psychiatrists will tell you is that we've really taken on godlike qualities. We don't go run around saying we're God, but we run around acting like we're God, and that's the problem. And so it's getting that relationship with God, with that higher power, that is so critical. It's not that you have a belief in God. I don't really care about that. What matters is that you have an experience of God, and that it isn't you. And I think that's pure program. That's exactly what the steps and the process is really here to bring about. So William James plays a huge role in the development of AA. Wilson calls him one of the co-founders. He was very free with that definition to be a co-founder. Named a lot of people that, but it was important. I think in studying the history, I think I see the influence of James in a deeper understanding of step 1 and a richer understanding of step 12. So, but James's book is 115 years, almost 120 years old. It's dated somewhat. It's difficult. What James did in there was he studied throughout history, and then some modern people back in those days who had undergone spiritual experiences, and he wanted to find out what was common to them. And Dr. William Miller, who is or was at the University of New Mexico, did a similar thing maybe about 15, 20 years ago himself, wherein he built on James's work. It hadn't been revisited in a long time. And he wanted to do a study of transformational change in individuals. Wrote a book coming out of this study called it Quantum Change, When Epiphanies and Sudden Insights Transform Ordinary Lives. It's a really good book. And what he did was he put an ad in the Albuquerque newspaper, said, if you've had one of these psychic changes or spiritual experiences, something really out of the ordinary, let us know. We want to talk to you. And got a tremendous response from the people out there who told them, and he did in-depth interviews with them as to what was going on in their lives. What happened? What brought it about? How long did it last? What was going on there? And in summation, at this part, because I'm interested in what brought about the change. That's what we're going to talk about in this episode. You know, how do you get ready for the change? And don't worry, most of our listeners have. We've done the research. Our trick is to benefit from the research we've done. So Miller says this: if we had to describe in a few words the most common candidates for quantum change, they would be people who were desperately unhappy, had been for some time, and saw no way out through their own efforts. People who had been unhappy, desperately so, had been for some time. It isn't just usually one little bad night. It's been going on for some time, and that time element is wearing my ego down. See, it's a good thing that it's happening. It's a good thing that the pain is there. Pain has the power to change people. That's really what you're gonna, I hope, gain from this episode. You know, and there was no way out by themselves. Couldn't get under it, over it, or around it. Had to go through it. One of my favorite psychologists, Robert Johnson, Jungian therapist, he talks about it this way. It's a lovely phrase, and I use it a lot. He says, it's boiling in the oil of transformation. You know, you boil and it gets hot. It gets painful. And that's the bad part of it. The good part of it is that it can bring about transformation. And I like it in the sense that, if my ego requires more boiling in the oil of transformation, then I'm sent back. And I'm sent back frequently. But there's meaning and there's purpose to the suffering. It's not without benefit. Richard Rohr says something somewhat similar. He says there's two things powerful enough to change a person: pain and prayer. And he goes on sarcastically to say, most of us choose pain. Jung, or a story is told about Jung from one of his patients who had been seeing him for some time in Switzerland. And then he was granted a promotion at work and came in, and he's all excited for his session with Jung. And he says, Doc, I've been promoted to, vice president of this, that, and the other thing. And Jung sits back in his chair and he says, well, that's very nice. That's very nice. But we're not going to get very much work done today. What did he mean? We're not going to get very much work done today. He was saying you're in a state of inflation. You're puffed up. You're like a balloon and you're flying 1,000 feet up and off the ground. We're not going to get very much work done. Work gets done when you get down back on the earth, right? When you're digging in the soil, that's where the work happens. When there's some pain that needs to be transformed, that when there's some suffering that needs to be endured and shared, that's where change happens. Jung said something else that is really important, and this is in regards to the longer trajectory, not just the daily ups and downs, but how life unfolds for us. And he says this, he says that there are a certain set of rules that apply to the first half of life. And it's a time of building up. It's a time of having successes. It's a time of having people pat you on the back and say, atta boy, atta girl, way to go, and to feel good about yourself, to create a self. But then, and he puts it maybe arbitrarily at age 35, but then in the second half of life, the rules have changed. And now it's not a time of building up. Now it becomes a time of letting go, a time of releasing things. It's not a time to go make another fortune if you've been fortunate enough to have one in the first half, And how many people do I know like that? That it's one more sale, or it's one more this, or it's one more that. If I just get this, I'm going to be okay. That's the first half of life rules. And they don't apply in the second. Matter of fact, they keep you very sick, very sick. So it's a refusal to suffer. It's a refusal to allow things to unfold naturally the way they need to. Pain. We're going to talk about pain here, eh? And I'm gonna go back to James, because I think James does a really lovely description of it, and it's the one that really affected Wilson. It's going to hold true for Miller as well. So Wilson is in detox, and he's had his spiritual experience, feels the presence of God, feels like something has really shifted deep inside of him, feels that presence, wonders if he's going crazy, and doesn't understand it. And he's brought a book. We think it's by Ebby, that he was the carrier of the book, and it was James's book, Variety of Religious Experience. And Bill Wilson devours the book because he's trying to understand, what was it that just happened to me? And suddenly everything came into focus. So we're going to read this. And this is Wilson speaking on tape when he was doing his biography. He says, William James was an intellectual, and the book was tough reading. But after a time, I began to see that all the experiences cited, or at least nearly all of them, had certain common denominators, despite the variety of ways in which they manifested themselves. The first common denominator was calamity. Nearly every recipient described had met utter defeat in some controlling area of his life. Every resource of courage, understanding, and will had failed. Each had beat in despair upon a wall and had seen no way over, under, or around. This was an essential condition of the experience to follow. Calamity. It should come as good news to most of us. We have usually a pretty good store of calamity in our lives, no shortage. But here's the thing. Calamity can have an effect on us, or it can not have an effect on us. We can just go out there and collect calamities rather than let them do their work and suffer our way through them and benefit from the experience. I remember when I was doing group counseling over in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, it's back in the 1970s. And there were two fellows sitting in my group, and one guy was there because his attorney thought it would be a good idea for him to check into treatment. And it was. He had been in a terrible automobile accident, and he had killed 4 members of a family, 2 young kids included. And he's sitting there in group. And sitting right next to him, and I swear this is a true story, sitting right next to him is a guy who checked into treatment because he had gotten drunk and missed his son's birthday. And the story behind that is that his father was a terrible alcoholic and had beaten him mercilessly when he was growing up. And he swore that his drinking would never, ever, ever affect his children. And it did. And when it did, he was a puddle. His ego collapsed. So there they are sitting right next to one another. And one guy got it and one guy didn't. One guy had a transformation, a psychic change, and one guy did not. They both had calamities, but for one, the calamity registered, and for the other, didn't even come close. He was trying to always figure out, how can I get over, under, around this thing? Wilson continues, the next condition was the admission from the very depths of being that defeat was utter and absolute. Each individual had to concede that he simply couldn't go on living upon his own steam. This is getting crushed down to the core. Quote Robert Johnson again. He says, for most people, the transition from 3-dimensional to 4-dimensional consciousness, the shift into a psychic change, is exceedingly painful. Medieval Christianity called it the dark night of the soul. Dante called it the journey through hell. 40 days and 40 nights in the desert for Jesus. It was a journey in the belly of the fish for many a hero. What is this thing? It's the hero's journey that every man and every woman really needs to go on to really become somebody, not to become an alcoholic, that's not hard, but to take the alcoholism, to take that calamity and to make something of it. See, that's the hero's journey. It's the vision quest in some cultures, the rites of passage in Aboriginal culture in Australia. Not probably so much anymore, which is tragedy. And in Native American culture, there were these vision quests where the young boys in particular, just when they're feeling like they're hot stuff, 13, 14 years old, puberty has hit and the juices are running, and they think they are hot stuff. Well, they're dangerous. That's what the culture believes. At that point, you are very dangerous if you think you're such hot stuff. And so they had rights that came into effect at that point in their lives. What would happen? The old men of the village would come and steal the boys out from the arms of their mothers, and the mothers knew it was coming. And they would wail and shout and scream and participate in the thing. The kids were terrified. And what would the old men do? They'd drag them into the woods, and they would inflict pain and suffering upon them. They would cut them often, tattoo them. Circumcision often happened at this point. Think you're hot stuff? Try some of this. Feel that. It was a rite of passage. It imparted onto their psyches an understanding, at least a taste of maybe I'm not so hot. Maybe there's something bigger and stronger than I am out there. And maybe I need to submit myself to that. Right now, it's in the form of these old men who are doing this to me. All right. But later on, it's going to be life. It's going to be life itself that's really doing it to them. And as a result of this experience, they're able to take that the blows and the pains and the sufferings that are going to come along with life, and they're going to be able to experience them and go through them, not try to go around and under and over. Hey, it's a shame that we've lost these. In the Christian culture, it used to be at that age that the bishop would slap you on the face. And I think this was confirmation rite, about the same age. And that's what it really goes back to. That's what that ceremony was about. And I'm sure some modern day mothers or dads said, "Oh, don't hurt little Junior." Well, little Junior has a way then of not growing up, and the bishops have a way of just a gentle, tiny little slap instead of giving them what they really need. And I'm not talking about child abuse or anything like that. I'm talking about benefiting from the experience of suffering. It has value. And if we can't see that, then the suffering is going to go on and it's going to be meaningless. And that is probably the worst kind of suffering. The moment of suffering, what's God's role in it? Is God causing it? It's a question that many of us used to ponder at 2:00 in the morning when we were drunk. No, I think God's going to be found within it as a part of it. I'm going to quote from Martin Luther. I'm not a great Luther student, but his quote appears in a book by Edward Edinger, another Jungian therapist. It's talking about this suffering role, and I think it's really important. It's good. He says, God works by contraries, so that a man feels himself to be lost in the very moment when he is on the point of being saved. When God is about to justify a man, he damns him. Whom he would make alive, he first must kill. Salvation begins when a man believes himself to be utterly lost. That's when the light breaks in. When I was with Richard Rohr, we did a rites of passage thing many years ago out in Ghost Ranch in New Mexico. And at the beginning of every day when we'd start a session, Richard would play this hymn. It's called Anthem by Leonard Cohen, a great poet. There's a beautiful line in it. The line says, there's a crack in everything. And that's how the light gets in. That's how the light gets in. We have an expression, I'm cracking up, I'm falling apart. Good. That can be an opportunity for change, for transformation. Is it painful? Damn right it is. Is it possible, though, if I can go through that pain, that I can come out the other end? When I got sober in Detroit, there were two things I knew I needed to do, and they were equally important. One was do not drink, no matter what. And the other was do not run, because I was a runner. And so I endured the suffering. I was sent by a therapist to work and live on Skid Row for 1 year. That was the way they were going to raise my bottom. I was a young punk kid, 27 years old, wasn't at a physical bottom, all right, but I was at a spiritual bottom. I was at a psychological bottom. And this therapist believed that if I could go and endure, they could shave 10 years off of my drinking. See? And I did it. I've never sent anyone else on that spiritual quest, but I wouldn't trade it for anything, because it taught me a deep lesson. See, and this is what the big book tells us. It isn't the amount of suffering that we go through. It's have we gone through enough suffering that it has registered in us? That's the point. Wilson continues. The third condition was an appeal to a higher power for help. This appeal could take innumerable forms, might be accompanied by a faith in God, or it might not. But an appeal it had to be. And if you think of Bill Wilson's prayer in the detox room, "Oh God, if there is a God, show yourself to me." He didn't have faith. He had desperation, all right? Had desperation. And that was his prayer just before the transforming experience came about. He says, then it happens, and then it sets in, sometimes like a thundercloud, or very gradually, following repeated appeals. The individual would grow slowly into a new state of consciousness and release. That's the end result. To arrive at step 12, a new state of consciousness, a new state of release. Wilson again, utter defeat, the completed admission of helplessness, and the appeal. These were the essential things. Jung had sent his patient Roland Hazard to go in search of one of these. He said it was his last hope. That psychiatry had done everything that it had to offer, and Jung couldn't do any more. I had a therapist who said to me when I was in treatment that second day, he says, "Bill, you're clinically impossible." He was building on the work of Jung. You're clinically impossible. It's going to take a miracle. And I think that's what AA, NA, CA, all of the A's are about. It's a course in miracles, to borrow an expression. That if we follow that course, if we will stay the course, then something's going to happen to us. Something's going to happen. What does the book say? Almost none of us like the self-searching, the leveling of our pride, the confession of shortcomings that the process required, but we did it. We did it. So don't look for the steps so much as a stairway to heaven, but perhaps more. First, we gotta take the steps down into hell, and I think that's where the gift of desperation really comes to the fore. When we have let the suffering do its work, takes exactly what it takes in order to get us here. Work with people who are 15, 16, 17. They've had enough. The suffering has done its work. They're ready for the transformation. I've had people who didn't arrive till they were 80. But when they arrive at 80, they're ready for it to happen. And every one of them, if they will really be honest, will say, it took exactly what it took. Didn't get here a minute too soon. Didn't get here a minute too late. So that's the journey. That's the gift of desperation that we can take our suffering and turn it into. So hope some of this has been helpful. It's been a heck of a ride for me, and so grateful to all the people who helped me along the way to stay the course. So take good care. God bless. Keep coming back.